Welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Show. I'm Susanne. This is Jeremy, and we're here this week just talking about something that we have personally talked about quite a bit, spoken of quite a bit, and it's something that we feel like is often misunderstood. Maybe the perspective is a little bit off, and that's the topic of forgiveness. And we're here just to kind of give maybe just a broad kind of perspective about it, an overview of kind of what that looks like, and that's what we're going to be talking about this week.
Yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about. And Susanne just said this, it's an overview. This show typically runs about 30 minutes. Now, I'm just saying that up front to tell you this. The conversation about forgiveness is a conversation that we could spend probably many hours talking about. And then once you take the overview of forgiveness, what it is, we would like to talk about what it is and how you can do that, some steps you can take to move forward. Once you talk about that, then you can make application to your own life and your own journey. And that's an entirely different conversation. You may be in a difficult situation where you have been sorely wronged, you've been severely wronged, and so you have strong opinions about forgiveness. That's fine, we're not trying to change that, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you're on the other side of it and you need to ask for forgiveness. That's an important thing as well. And you know, nothing we're going to say is to suggest that this is an easy conversation or an easy process. In fact, if you look at all of the things in the world that you could do, offering forgiveness to someone that's hurt you or asking for forgiveness would be right at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. It's very, very difficult. I would like to make a statement kind of right up front, and this is, to me, this is an important statement that we'll come back to later, but I'd like for you to just think on this for a second, okay? Because we often talk about forgiveness in terms of victimhood. You're not a victim if you are unable or unwilling to forgive. Now, we're going to talk about that. We're going to unpack that. Maybe you've been a victim, but beyond being victimized, that thing that happened to you, you then have to make some decisions. And one of the decisions you need to make is whether or not you're going to forgive. And I'd like to say it this way if I can. If you decide that you can't or won't forgive, you decide that you can't or won't forgive, that is a decision that you make to stay in prison. And again, we'll try to unpack this a little bit, but that's a decision you make to stay in prison. That is not something that's being done to you. That is something that is being done by you. You can't control what other people do to you. You can't. And as terrible as human beings can be to each other, and human beings can be extremely terrible to each other. We know that. We deal in this. We work with folks who have been hurt by people close to them and on and on. I understand that. But on the other side of that, we need to make a decision. And really that decision determines whether or not we're going to move forward. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's jump into it then. All right. Forgiveness. Let's start if we can, and you can start off with this. Why is this an important conversation to have? Why is forgiveness, not the act of forgiveness, but understanding this, talking about it, dealing with this, why is this so important?
This is probably going to, we're going to be talking about this throughout, the next 30 minutes or so. But it's important to understand what it is, how to do it, how to live in it. So, the only thing that comes to mind is like what you said, so that we're not living kind of in captivity to that unwillingness to even extend it, receive it, understand how to do all those things, because we're not able to live a free life, not burdened down with those things kind of that's kind of holding us back from maybe living the life that God intended for us to live. And it's just not right to hold something like that over, someone else, or to harbor feelings of, that come from unforgiveness or an unwillingness to forgive someone else. And it really burdens us, and I feel like keeps us kind of in prison or in that captivity, that we're not able to live that free, full life that God intended for us to live.
I like the analogy of prison. I've heard someone say that a lack of forgiveness is like being trapped in a prison cell with the door open. Mm-hmm. You're trapped in a prison cell. You are in a prison cell, and anyone who has struggled with a lack of forgiveness, or the intense feelings of being hurt by someone else and being unwilling to let go of that, they know that feeling of being in a prison cell. But it's not a prison that you have been placed into and the door's locked and you have no escape. It's a prison cell where the way of escape is you learning how to get up and move forward. And that can be a long process, of course, but that's how you move forward. That's how you get out of the prison. So why? Because understanding forgiveness and offering forgiveness and receiving forgiveness, these are the things that allow us to be free.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key word there is freedom. And it allows us to live, like I said, the life that we were intended to live and move forward in that way, regardless of, what has, or because of what we are able to extend to someone else.
Right. So freedom is a big one. It frees us up, and we can talk about that. And again, try to personalize this as much as possible. We all know what this is like. We've all been hurt. We've all spent periods of time in our life, some short periods of time, some a lifetime, harboring bitterness and anger and frustration, and we mask it really well for most people, but it's always there kind of sitting on us because we're not willing to go through the process of forgiveness. And so we're trapped. As much as we look free, we're trapped. So freedom is a big one, and that's really important. There's a second one, though, and this is something we won't spend a lot of time talking about, but again, we could do an entire episode on this, but it's the process of reconciliation. Many relationships are, I was going to say damaged. They're not damaged, they're destroyed because of a lack of forgiveness. Because one person in that relationship hurts the other one, does something. Again, not to minimize any of this, it can be very damaging within that relationship. And because there is no forgiveness, because there is not even a willingness to go through a process of getting help and having someone else come in to try to work through this process with you or whatever, there will not be reconciliation. And I think a lot of relationships that don't need to end, and this can be marriage relationships, relationships with children, relationships with older parents, relationships with coworkers, whatever, where there could be reconciliation. And I think the ultimate goal of forgiveness is reconciliation. There could be reconciliation. There could be a newness of that relationship and longevity and all of those things. It's not possible if we're unwilling to forgive. So freedom is a big one. I need to be free. They need to be free. But there's also the aspect of reconciliation, bringing two broken things back together.
And it's really allowing that relationship to be all that it's maybe intended to be, whatever that relationship is. When you talked about the different types of relationship that we deal with in our life, and if that relationship is meant to continue, and we're going to talk a little bit more about healthy, in a healthy way. And when you come to reconciliation with that person in your life, then that relationship can then move forward and be all that it's intended to be. So not only will we be free to move forward and live a life, that we were intended to live, but then our relationships are going to be the same. We'll be able to be free and move forward in that relationship, and that's going to look like the way it's supposed to.
And reconciliation, again, we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but reconciliation does require both people to want to have reconciliation. If there's only one person interested in this, there won't be reconciliation. There can be an offer of forgiveness. There can be a life of a willingness to forgive. There can be aspects of this that are very, very helpful, but there will not be full reconciliation if both people aren't interested in it. And again, with reconciliation, just on an aside, reconciliation, forgiveness, giving forgiveness, receiving forgiveness, reconciliation is not the same thing as learning how to cope. I believe a lot of people have figured out in their relationships how to cope. We won't talk about that thing, or when I feel bad about that, I'll just avoid it, or whatever. There's some aspect of it we'll just kind of push it off into a corner. That's not reconciliation. That's learning to cope, and ultimately that will implode as well.
Yeah, there's a huge difference, and this is why we felt kind of the need to talk about this, because I feel like that there's kind of a misunderstanding in our life, in our culture, of kind of the difference between what all those words mean, and I think that's really important to point out.
And the last one is, for people of faith, for people that would say that the Bible is the authority in their lives, we have a command to forgive, and this is as important. This is for a Christian, for a person of faith, this is more important than the other reasons. It begins and ends with what God tells us to do. Ephesians 4:32 is a verse, if you don't have it memorized and you're in a relationship of any kind, meaning you ever talk to someone as a human, you need to know it. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32 tells us that we are to forgive as Christ, as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven us. Forgive others as God, that is the Father, for Christ's sake, because of what Jesus did for us, has forgiven us. What's fascinating about Ephesians 4:32, and again, we won't spend a lot of time here just mentioning it, is that it comes at the end of a long passage of Scripture, Ephesians chapter 4, dealing with relationships in the church. So relationships among Christian people. And it talks about things like bitterness and like anger and like speaking bad about other people. All of these things are spoken of in Ephesians chapter 4. And all of that ends with, here's what you need to do to deal with that. You need to forgive. Just like God, because of Jesus, has forgiven you. So we have a lot of reasons to be interested in forgiveness. You can just survive if you want to, just get by. More people do that than not. Mm-hmm. But if you really want to live the life that you were created to live, if you want to find joy and happiness and contentment and peace in your life and in your relationships, you need to be interested in forgiveness. Why? Because of freedom, it's found in forgiveness. Reconciliation is found in forgiveness. And we have a command from God. Mm-hmm. I think these are all good reasons.
And I think what's interesting about that verse, Ephesians 4:32, before it says forgive, it talks about being kind and being tenderhearted. Sure. Be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has, or in Christ's sake, or I don't know.
Yeah.
For Christ's sake, has forgiven us. So it starts with kindness, and then tenderhearted, which would be compassion. Maybe seeing something from a different perspective.
Sure.
And so I feel like it kind of goes through those steps that we take before we get to the point where we're able to actually forgive someone else. And so that verse is a really good reminder for those that have a relationship with Christ, and kind of puts it all in perspective, is kindness, compassion, forgiveness.
That's right. That's very good. So we talk about the why, and again, I keep saying this. It's probably completely unnecessary to keep saying it.
Yeah, maybe.
I just keep saying it anyhow. We would both acknowledge that there's a lot more to all of this than we can cover right now, but we want you to think on these things. So why? There's a lot of very, very good reasons, and you'll never be exactly what God wants you to be until you understand them. Okay, so what? And this is where there's a lot of confusion. What is forgiveness? Really? What is forgiveness? I'll mention a couple things, and then you can speak more broadly on these. I think one of the things it is the first step toward reconciliation. So again, we talked about reconciliation as one of the things that can come from this. It's the first step. If you need to be forgiven for something that you did, the first step to reconciling a relationship is to ask forgiveness. Maybe someone has hurt you and they don't know it, or they do know it, but they don't care. You approaching them, we'll talk about this in a minute, you approaching them is the first step toward reconciling that relationship. So we always say, if they would, then I would. They need to take if you care about reconciliation, then you need to take the first step. So that's one thing. The other thing is release. This goes along with freedom. If reconciling is the ultimate goal, that's what we would all love to see come from this. There is a point at which we'll probably understand in some relationships that that's not possible. People would say, what if a parent has hurt me? In the work that we do, we talk to so many folks who have been hurt by parents or those who should have been caring for them. Maybe they were hurt as children, maybe they were abused as children, and now they're adults, and now they're trying to figure all of this out for the first time on their own, and that parent is gone. They don't have the opportunity to reconcile. There are other relationships, often marriage relationships, where there was some violence in that relationship or some deep, deep hurt, and the person that has left has no intent to reconcile. They have no desire to reconcile. And you, as the one who wants that freedom, understands that. Maybe you can't, for some reason, talk to the person that you need to make this issue right with. There are a lot of reasons that reconciliation, apart from God working in an amazing way, is not possible. And so what happens then is you can look at that and say, well, I can never reconcile this relationship. They're dead, they're gone, they don't want to talk to me. This was a violent thing, a difficult thing. I don't want to deal with it, and so I have no interest in it. And we can say, because reconciliation is not possible, then I'm not interested in going through this process, and I am hopeless. Here's the other thing. What is it? It is a release. My dad said this to me a long time ago. Offering forgiveness, even to someone that is unwilling to accept it. Offering forgiveness, saying, I forgive you, is releasing the other person, the offending party, if you will, releasing the other person from your control. It's me saying to you who have hurt me, I no longer am asking you to be responsible to me. God will deal with you. You are not responsible to answer to me. It's me opening my hands and releasing, and therefore releasing you, but at the same time releasing myself. It's like I'm dropping the chains that have me bound. Those are two huge whats. What is it? It's working through a process of reconciliation, or it's releasing the other person, saying you're not subject to me anymore, you don't have to answer to me anymore, but it's also releasing me from what they've done to me.
Mm-hmm. I think part of that release too is, we are kind of letting them go. We're not allowing them to, it's not that control anymore.
Yeah.
But we're also, sometimes, like Jeremy said, the person that has wronged us, that's not someone that maybe we should have in our life, or maybe, depending on what that harm was that was done to us, somebody that we want back in our life. And so by continuing to hold on to that unforgiveness, I kind of look at it as like we're continuing to allow them to be part of our life when maybe they shouldn't be, or we shouldn't want them to be. But we're continuing to hold on to that and allowing them to continue to be part of our life. And so I think releasing in that way is a really healthy kind of way to look at it too. And I kind of think too, and this is maybe going in a completely different direction, but sometimes it feels good, like to hold on to that,
Sure.
Like to not let
right.
go of that person.
Right.
Because it gives us something. It gives us kind of like a torch that we're holding, and like this person, and we like to talk about it, and we like to, replay it.
It gives us
not,
a reason.
Maybe not because we like to think about it, or especially extremely harmful things. But in a way, we do.
Yeah.
In a way, we like to hold on to that because it makes us feel like we have something.
Yeah.
And who am I going to be without that? And so I kind of look at that like the release it's very, very difficult, but it's really necessary to be able to have that freedom that we talked about. So when I think about that word release, it kind of has so many different aspects to it. And one of them is that we like to hold on to that. And we like to have it as part of our life, and just that hurtful, wrongful thing. So I think it's really, really important to just remember that what that is releasing that person.
Yeah, it's amazing to me in talking to people who have been severely hurt, how so many people, although they don't articulate it this way, they really do like to be hurt. They like to be offended. We're living through a moment in time where the whole world is offended, it seems like. You're on one side or the other of all of these issues, and we've got a lot of issues. I mean, pick one.
Yeah.
And people want to be offended.
Yeah.
It's as if they're waiting for someone to offend them so they can grab hold of that. And yet that is contrary to even the Bible admonition of not worrying about anything, not being concerned about those things, letting God deal with those things and provide the peace that passes understanding in our heart. And I think we say we want peace, but we find some kind of strange comfort in having been offended. It gives us a cause, and it gives us something to get behind, to be mad about, and to jump on Facebook and talk about. And that release, again, it's not simple. It's all of that.
And then what are we going to do if people aren't, coming along, side us and comforting us? And, it is that comfort that we have, that, we like to have something.
Right.
And if I could only tell you all the things that have been done to me, and let me tell you, so it's a weird kind of thing. And like you said, I mean, I'm not trying to be condescending or anything to people that have been hurt, or, I mean, we all have stories of having been hurt and having to not be able to, forgive someone else, and having that story that we can talk about, that, let me tell you how this person has hurt me. And I think we do it not even thinking through it, in that way.
Yeah.
But I do, that's why I like that word release, because it does really release that person, but it allows that kind of thing to no longer have control in your life. And even if you think about all the things that it does to your other relationships when you are hanging on to that unforgiveness towards someone else, you think about all the anger, the bitterness, the resentment that it causes, and it could really damage or hurt a lot of the relationships, the other relationships, healthy relationships that you have in your life. And I've seen that happen in my life personally. And so I really think that is, that word release is just such a key word, I think, because you're kind of letting go of all those other things too. Yeah. Along with the forgiveness, you're kind of letting go of that bitterness, that resentment, that anger, and you're not allowing those things to have a hold on your life anymore.
I feel like it's a very powerful word too for people that feel like they have been victimized. To me, the idea of releasing, it means I have the ability to say, you will not control me anymore.
It's very powerful.
Particularly for those in what we might call intimate relationships, in a marriage situation or an intimate relationship where we've been hurt or we've been wronged. So often, we or folks in those relationships can be the victims of that. And again, we think of children who are abused by parents or close people who are close to them, and then they grow up and now they're trying to deal with that. There is so much power to those who have been victimized to say, no, you're not going to do that anymore. There's a couple things that it's not too. So we talk about why, and there's some reasons why this is important, what it is. But when we're talking about what it is, we also need to talk about what it is not. And again, some of the pushback that I've experienced certainly on this, and I know as you've talked to spouses, you get as well, comes in this. So what is it not? One thing it's not is letting someone off the hook for what they've done. So don't hear this wrong. Releasing someone and saying, you no longer answer to me, you no longer you can hold me bondage to this. It sounds like what we're saying is we're letting you off the hook for the bad that you've done.
Like forgive and forget.
Forgive and forget. But that's not what's happening. What we're saying is you don't answer to me for what's been done. Now maybe there's a criminal situation, right? So maybe the person they need to answer to is the court system. Maybe there needs to be some, not reconciliation, but retribution made because of what someone's done. There's a process in our system, in our government to deal with that. They need to answer to that. Perhaps it's something that is not criminal but has been extremely hurtful, and there is not the ability to reconcile. What you're releasing to is them to answer to God, who holds all men accountable, and to the other relationships in their life and the other things that they're going to do. This is not saying that what you did was okay. And sometimes that's why people hang on to it. It's saying it's not okay, but I'm not going to let what's not okay continue to damage me.
Yeah. I think that's really important when you are talking. I've personally spoken with a lot of spouses that have been in domestic violence kind of situations, and when you talk about forgiveness, it's a very kind of sensitive subject because that phrase, forgive and forget, is such a thing, and I don't like it because I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible to forget what someone has done to you, especially when it's been, in a violent kind of way, an abusive kind of way. But I do think it's possible to forgive without, and continue to move on. And so that phrase is, I don't like to use it or hear it because it's just not possible.
Right.
But I do think it is really important to understand that it's not, you're not letting that person off, the hook for something that they did for you. You're not forgetting what they've done to you. That's not what that means.
Right. So it's not letting someone off the hook. Again, there are a lot of situations where someone would have to be tried criminally or civilly. They're liable for things. Maybe they'll answer to someone else or something else at some point down the road. It's just saying, I'm not going to let you hang on to me anymore, really is what it is. So it's not letting someone off the hook. Also, this is so important. It's not continuing to live in a dangerous situation, dangerous emotionally, dangerous physically, and let me know if you want me to try to define these terms at some point, but it's not allowing someone to continue to hurt you. This is the tool of manipulation by someone who wants to continue to hurt you. They say things like, well, you're a Christian, you need to forgive me. Or if you loved me, you would forgive me. And what they mean by that is you need to let me continue to do these harmful things to you. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about staying in a situation where you're being hurt. And sometimes this requires a good counselor, someone else, law enforcement. It can require a lot of things. This also doesn't mean putting your kids in a dangerous situation. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means releasing so that you can continue to live your life in a good way, not staying in a situation that is dangerous or damaging.
I think it can even be a small, like, kind of daily. I mean, I've even told the kids before, if I, ask them for forgiveness for something, maybe I raised my voice at them, or I, had a bad attitude to them, and so when I've apologized to them before that, for those kinds of things, and I say, hey, please forgive me for responding that way to you, that wasn't right. And if they say, a lot of times the natural response that we have, like, oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
And so I've even said to them, like, no, it's not okay, because yes, I was frustrated, and yes, I was upset, but I should not have responded that way to you, and that's not okay. And I think that's really important to, even in our daily lives, kind of maybe understand and change some of that wording a little bit.
What do you say instead of it's okay?
I forgive you.
I forgive you.
I forgive you. So I really am trying to teach the kids, like, if you honestly, forgive, and I'm apologizing to you, I'm asking you for forgiveness, the correct response is, I forgive you, because I'm apologizing to you, and I'm telling you, these are the things I'm apologizing to you for, that I should not have said this, I should not have responded in this way, because it's wrong. And I'm saying that to you because I am acknowledging that it's wrong, and I'm acknowledging that I did that, but the correct response to that is not like, oh, it's okay. Because I'm not going to think, oh, they said it's okay, so I'm going to do it again.
Yeah.
But there are some people, the natural response is, oh, it's okay. And I kind of feel like that fosters almost that, like, oh, yeah, then that behavior is totally fine.
Right.
When it's actually not. And I just want, like, for our kids, I've been kind of like wanting them to get in the mindset of it's not okay to allow someone to treat you like that. And then if they come to you and apologize, it's not like, oh, that's fine.
And there may be a process if someone has hurt you. It's okay for you to accept their forgiveness.
Right.
But there may also be a process of rebuilding trust and confidence again in that. And so these are things you might need help working through, of course. But it's not saying it's okay for you to have done that. It's not letting someone off the hook. It's not continuing to live in a dangerous situation. So there's a reason why. There's a what. It's the first step in the process of reconciliation. It's a release. It's not saying it's okay. It's not continuing to do something dangerous, but it is extremely necessary to move forward. How? So we have 3 minutes. We're going to cover all the hows. We're going to cover all the hows of forgiveness in the next 3 minutes. How do you forgive, offer forgiveness, receive forgiveness? These are very, very important conversations to have. I will say this, perhaps one of the most important hows is to get qualified help. Sometimes you just need to sit down with someone that is a counselor, someone that has a bigger view of life and your situation, can hear your situation, understand where you're coming from, and then help you to lay out a process for doing this. And that may be, for many of you, the most important thing you can do is find someone who can help you through this.
You're talking about finding someone to help you know how to forgive someone else.
Know how to forgive or how to ask for forgiveness. When counseling spouses, dealing with spouses, often a spouse who's done something wrong will come to me, or you, we'll have these conversations, and they'll say, I need to tell my husband or wife what I did. I need to ask for forgiveness. I don't know how to do that. Most of the time, my very first advice is get someone to help you work through that. Don't do that on your own, because you're going to do it wrong. I think having help is very important. The other thing here is timing. Timing is also very, very important. Asking for forgiveness at the wrong time, offering forgiveness at the wrong time, it may be just as damaging as not having done anything.
Yeah, and I think timing too is also important when you're looking at, maybe there is something that you need to bring to someone, like they have wronged you, and maybe you just haven't had the right time to talk to them about it, and just maybe looking for the right opportunity, praying and asking God to show you, give me an opportunity to be able to talk to this person. I think timing is really important.
Yeah, timing is really important. Okay, a couple of things with this as well. How? There's two sides of forgiveness. There is the one who has done the wrong, and there's the one who has been wronged. And both both parties, it sounds really official when you say both parties, both people need to understand clearly their position in this, and so they know what to do. If you've done wrong, you need to acknowledge that you have done wrong. You need to acknowledge that you've done wrong. You need to go to the person that you've wronged and humbly acknowledge that. Now, humbly means don't make excuses for bad behavior. Don't say, I'm sorry I did this, but here's the reasons. I need you to forgive me, but you also need to understand. You ask for forgiveness for the thing you did without giving a reason for having done it. And it must be humble. That means you are coming to them understanding, I'm asking you to forgive me, something that you do not have to do. You need to set aside your pride and then do whatever is necessary to make the wrong right. If there is restitution that needs to be made, if you need to get building trust, as we mentioned, whatever it is, you need to humbly approach the person you've wronged, ask for forgiveness, and then be willing to go through the process of making the wrong right.
I think this is really difficult in relationships that are close to you. Spouses, with your kids, people that know you the best. That is really, really difficult to set aside pride, especially, especially with the people that are living in your house, because, they see all the things that you do wrong and the things that you do bad, and it's really difficult to set. But I think pride is a huge thing that gets in the way of people actually coming to the place where they say, okay, like I have to admit that I did something wrong, and I have to admit that I did something wrong, like to my kids, and they're like looking to me to be, this leader and to help them and to be an example to them, but to actually set aside that pride in your life and humble yourself enough that you're willing to admit that you did something that you weren't supposed to do, or that you, spoke to them in a manner that was not okay, or had this attitude towards them, or whatever, is such an example, even to those that are looking to you to be that.
I think pride is the reason we want to justify our bad behavior as well. I do this a lot with our kids, where I'll say, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but you shouldn't have done. And maybe they shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z, but it's the yelling I'm apologizing for, or it's the being unkind, or whatever the case. That's what I'm apologizing for. Now, if I also need to deal with the other thing, then that needs to be dealt with, but it should be dealt with separately, because the two aren't tied together. Wrongdoing that I've done should not be tied to something they did. Now I'm pushing that back on them, and it's not really asking for forgiveness at that point.
Yeah, that's really good.
So there's that. If you are the one who did the wrong, acknowledge that you've done wrong, set your side of pride, do whatever you set aside your pride, do whatever you have to make it right. The other side of this, though, is the one who has been wronged, and I think all of us feel like we've been wronged. Very few of us feel like we are the wrongdoer. But if you've been wronged, I think the place you need to start, and probably the most difficult place, and one of the reasons people don't ever get this right, is you need to start by informing the person who wronged you that they wronged you. Now, this isn't screaming at them or telling them what a dirtbag they are. Again, it's humbly approaching them and saying, right, wrong, or otherwise, what you said, what you did, how you acted, how you looked, that hurt me, that wronged me. And part of this is examining your own heart. If you should not have been wronged by it, if it was just, you should not have received it the way that it was, or clearly that's not what they meant, they didn't mean to hurt you, you decided to take it wrong, because again, we're living in everyone's upset right now. And not everyone is trying to upset you. But if someone sincerely did you wrong, sincerely tried to hurt you, or said something to you, or did something to you, then the place you need to start, because again, the goal is to reconcile, the place you need to start is by going to them humbly and kindly, and sometimes with a third party, someone who can help kind of officiate this and work through this. Hey, I care enough about you, and I care enough about our relationship, and this is going to get in the way of our relationship. I just want you to know this thing that happened, it really hurt me. So often people hurt us, and we hold bitterness toward them, and they don't even know it happened. Maybe they know they did it, but they don't know how we took it, or they don't know we took it so hard, or whatever the case. I would imagine I've upset a lot of people along the way that I have no idea I've upset. I kind of have that personality, and sincerely, I'm not trying to hurt most people. I would say no people, but I probably have at some point. but it happens, and it's not fair to the person that has wronged you. We all need to be careful, but it's not fair to the person that's wronged you to be bitter and angry, upset at them, and unwilling to reconcile when they have no idea what happened.
Sometimes I think too that you have people in your life that you know that if you have that conversation, it's not going to go very well, and that they will either not admit that they did anything wrong, they'll push it back on you, they'll make a huge, like a bigger deal out of it than what it actually is. We've all had those conversations with people when they're unwilling to admit that they did anything wrong, or they remember the situation differently, or they try to turn it around on you. And that's why it's so important, if you decide to have that conversation with someone like that you take someone maybe along with you that can kind of help facilitate that a little bit, whether it's you're going to a counselor, or you just bring another person with you that kind of knows the situation, that's able to help you kind of process through that a little bit with that other person. Sometimes I do think it's okay to, if you have those people in your life, just to continue to wait for the right timing, pray that God would show you what the right timing for that would be, but that doesn't mean that you cannot extend that forgiveness to them. Right. If you're not able to have that conversation, I don't think that you need to continue to hold on to that, that unforgiveness that causes that bitterness and resentment and that anger, because we can move forward in our life without maybe that reconciliation taking place yet, but we can extend that forgiveness to that person, be free from that, and release them, release the control that it has on our life, and continue to move forward in our life in that freedom and with that release that we talked about. And that is very, very possible, is to live.
And even if they reject you in that conversation.
Yes, yes. And I think in both of those situations, if you haven't had the time to have that conversation yet, the opportunity, but then also if that conversation doesn't go very well, then you have at least brought that to them. But that doesn't mean that you have to continue to live in that unforgiveness. You can still extend that to them, move forward, and just know that it's either never going to be reconciled, or maybe that's a relationship that has to have a little more time until that reconciliation is able to take place.
Yeah, that's, and as we talk about all this, that's what we may describe as standing in a position of forgiveness. I've released you. I've done my due diligence. I've tried to have a conversation. I've tried to reconcile. It hasn't happened. Again, we deal a lot with spouses, and so those are a lot of my examples. But I know many spouses, we talked about, particularly ladies tend to be more this way, where they've tried to reconcile, tried with a spouse who is unwilling, and they have become almost trapped in the cycle of, I cannot move forward or think forward or do anything in my life until they accept my forgiveness. We have a responsibility to offer forgiveness. We have a responsibility to release. We have a responsibility to go to someone and do our best to reconcile to the extent that we can. Again, as we've already discussed. But if that does not happen, that doesn't mean our life is over. They don't have the power to keep us from moving forward in our lives. And if we give that power to them, that's a decision that we make. But they can't just take it. They don't have it. We do what we can. We try to reconcile. And then we work through a process of releasing. And it's important to understand two things as we finish. Number one, this may be a daily, at least for a while, because we get in habits of thinking bad thoughts and feeling bitter feelings and being angry, and the further we get away from a situation, sometimes it gets better. But this may be a daily process of going, no, I release you, I've released you. I'm not going to be beholden to that anymore. I'm going to let that go. It's not fair to hold something over someone's head that you have told them you've forgiven either. And so we release that. Again, sometimes this requires help in the form of a counselor or something else. So there's that. It may be a daily process. The second thing is, this process has to be rooted in something that is fundamental to you. As a Christian, this is something we talked about. As a Christian, the foundation of all of this, the reason we do it, the way we're able to continue moving forward even when someone has hurt us, is because we have a command from Scripture and because we have the example of Jesus, God the Creator, who was murdered by His creation, loved us in spite of it, and offers forgiveness to us. And that's the thing, really, on the other side of all of this, that allows us to move forward in forgiveness in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to remember, is that it's humanly impossible for us to forgive in the way that we're talking about. because it's not. It goes against our nature. It goes
Right.
against, how the world in which we live. It goes against everything that we know to be true in this world. And the only way that we're really able to completely forgive someone else in this way is when we understand and when we view it from the perspective of what Christ has done for us, and when we're truly able to accept what he did for us, and then because of that, it gives us the power to be able to do that for someone else.
Yeah, that's right. This is a huge conversation, but again, there are those who would listen to this. I've said this. I know Susanne said this. I can't do it. I can't forgive them. Or if we're being really honest, I won't forgive them. And again, you may be listening to this or watching this, and you'd say the same thing. But as I started, if you say I can't or won't forgive, that is a decision that you make. It's a decision you make to stay in prison. This is not being done to you. This is something that you are doing. I know that sounds hard, but we have got to get a hold of that reality, that truth. No one can keep you in prison except for yourself. It's not going to be easy. Again, it may require help. It certainly will require time. It's going to be something you'll be invested in for a while. There may be loss of relationships. There may be difficult rebuilding of relationships. No one's saying any of this is easy. But the only way to get out of the prison of unforgiveness is to say, I'm going to release the person that has hurt me, has offended me, has damaged me, has traumatized me. I'm going to release them and let them be accountable to someone else and go forward and live the life that God has called me to live. That's it. There's so much to this. And again, we do this to be helpful. And I hope that this is helpful to you. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, go ahead and drop those in the comments section. We'd love to see those. And we'll do our best to respond to those when they come up. We were Facebook Living. And if you were watching that, it dropped out on us. So sorry about that. Go ahead and leave your comments here. And we'd love to get those from you again. And we'll do our best to answer those. Also, if you have things that you would like for us to talk about, we'd love to deal with that. We don't have everything figured out. It's called the Imperfect Show for a reason, because we're all imperfect and we're all just trying to figure this out. But with time and space, we have the opportunity to take some of these issues, get help from other people to know how to address them. We have some experience addressing some of these things. We've addressed them in our own marriage and our own relationships with our own kids. And so we just want to share that with you, and maybe we can work together to get to the right place. But again, if you appreciate this, please do subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share it out, comment for sure, and we'd love to get it back, get these comments back from you. Yep.
Don't have anything else to add.
Okay, that's good. All right.
That's great. Thank you, guys.
We're all done. Talk to you next time.